Hello, everyone. I'm Daniel. I'm joined, as always, by Superfeng99, and we're here to talk about the third scenario of the Innsmouth conspiracy, In Too Deep. Something when I was making these slides, I noticed that suddenly all of the titles of these scenarios are shorter, only 3 words this time, and for next week it'll only be two.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I never thought about that.
It's usually something like the vanishing of Eleanor Harper. It takes up so much space on the slide there. But
hmm
let's talk about this one. It's such a cool scenario, and I've had a great time playing it. If you watched earlier this week, you saw what it was like in solo. I will make some remarks there as well, but we will talk about it in general. So here we are, the town of
Right.
Innsmouth again.
Yeah, we're back, albeit in the future this time, or I guess in the present, aka not in a flashback.
Hmm.
Weird. Yeah. So we got back here, and we gotta get on a bus to get to out of town, if I am not mistaken. Um, and yeah, it's getting flooded as we do so. We gotta escape the rising tide. So. As we get here, the notable thing with this scenario are these tokens that are placed in between locations here. These are known as barriers, and the rules for these barriers are shown in the campaign guide. Essentially, it's just if there's one or more barriers between your locations, you just can't move between them. And there are some abilities that can remove barriers to be able to move between them. The more weird rules interactions for bears is when it comes to enemies. So normally, hunter enemies move to attempt to ignore barriers unless there is no such path from a hunter to the investigator it's hunting to, and in that case, it literally just skips through the barriers. Um, and if I recall, enemies can still move through barriers if it's not like a hunter enemy movement. Like if you push them away, they can move through barriers from that effect, if I recall.
Yep, that's right. Doesn't happen too often, but you might have some player cards that do it.
Indeed. Like if you push them away with a hammer, for example.
Yeah, if they don't die already.
Correct. Um, Other than that, the scenario is pretty straightforward. We have our keys, and this time we have one key in particular, the black key, which is actually going to be placed at the hideout location, or actually it was just called the hideout.
Hmm.
That was the hideout in the Vanishing of Eleanor Harper. So, if I recall, in our review series, that was the Esoteric Order of Dagon, if I believe correctly.
Oof, I don't remember, but sure, let's put it there.
Let's put it there. It's honestly a little well, okay. This is not the worst place it could be, I think. But it's definitely difficult, I think.
So it can only be on those locations. There were 6 of them, right, that were potential hideouts. But we're
Correct.
actually reusing all of the same locations from the previous scenario, albeit they are different cards this time. So some of them started in play, as you remember, but then some of them came from the leads deck. So it could only be one of the ones from the leads deck, not, I think most of the ones that weren't are at the beginning, but not all of them.
Correct. So
This one
let's see.
wasn't.
House. Yeah, so the locations that were uh in the second scenario in the previous scenario are all here, I believe.
Yeah. So.
So the harbor, bridge, and refinery, the
Mhm.
square, the grocer and the house, and the little bookshop. So they
Yep.
were all there. All right. Okay. Well, uh I think we're ready to begin. For the most part, we start here on the bottom right, next to the desolate coastline. Oh, that's right. One thing I should mention. Um, there is a thing for each suspect enemy that is out for blood.
Yep.
And I have never done this, but each suspect enemy that is out for blood, aka you killed them in the Vanishing of Eleanor Harper without them actually being the kidnapper or whatever
Hmm.
it's called. They come back and they're here to kill you. So for example, you could have like I don't know Barnes' March, and you would spawn at the Mosh Refinery, and per the text of the agenda, they lose aloof and cannot be part of it. So they're literally just extra enemies.
Don't do that.
Yeah, so an additional reason for you to not do this, I think you're swamped with enough enemies in this scenario to begin with. So,
Hmm.
all right, well, that's basically it. Shall we get going?
Hmm.
We start at the desolate coastline. Two shroud, one clue. Sorry, excuse me. Card effects cannot place barriers between desolate coastline and connecting locations. So there's always these two here, but once the barriers are cleared, you cannot have any more. This is just to prevent cases where you might be legitimately stuck.
Hmm. Yeah.
All right, next, and you'll realize actually this is a very key thing, is that for the most part there are no barriers in between rows of the setup except for this one.
Mhm.
And the way that the barriers are positioned is that there it kind of like makes you want to go into the zigzag pattern, which is very interesting design. So we shall do the same. Here we have the Innsmouth Harbor, one shot, one per clues. As a reaction, after you enter this location, you can move directly to the house on Water Street. You can also double action to parlay to remove a barrier between this location and a connecting location. So most of the time you come here, you might just honestly want to go straight to the house on Water Street since there might be some stuff here.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed there is. Two shroud, one per clues. There is a randomly set aside face down key. Let's just bring it out. And there's a free trigger to discard a card from your hand to remove a barrier.
So this is a good time to say, what are these keys for? The random keys that are just placed here.
Correct. Technically, we don't know. But later on in the scenario, on a location, I believe, later down, there is a reward that you get for having 5 or more keys, I believe.
There's 2. There's one that's 5 or more and one that's 7 or more.
Correct. And 7 or more being all 7.
Mm-hmm.
And so the kind of a sub goal of getting the scenario finished is getting those rewards as well.
Yeah. So if you look at the map, it's very easy to just say, I'm going to go this way. And then if you have, we didn't talk about how to get rid of barriers yet, but if you just want to go straight across, instead of visiting every location, you can.
Yep.
Because you're supposed to get to the railroad station by the end. But as Innsmouth likes to do, there are some alternate, well, not alternate, but like some stretch goals, and the keys themselves are part of that.
Indeed. Speaking of, let's talk about how to get rid of barriers to begin with, because we have these extra options on the locations, but there is also a base effect to spend 1 per +1 clues as a group to remove a barrier between your location and a connecting location. It doesn't take an action to do so, which is very nice. And yeah, all you need is clues.
And the best part, I think, is that you don't even need to be on the same location.
Correct. Basically, at least the person who's taking their turn basically needs to be at the location.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
One of the, or it doesn't even have to be on your turn, right? It could be on someone else's turn.
That's true.
So the scaling is interesting. On solo, you always spend 2 clues. And then if you're 4-player, it's just 5 clues. The penalty is, I guess, less so on 4-player, but there's more likelihood of you adding a bunch of barriers. So maybe that's necessary.
Ready. And yeah, as the act said, we just got to get to the railroad station. And there's a resign ability on there that we need to do.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Shall we continue on?
Sure.
So let's get rid of this barrier.
Let's say we spent our clues from picking up stuff here or something.
Yep. We can get to the Marsh Refinery. Threshold 1 clue. Pre-trigger, if you control 1 or more keys, you can move. Easy peasy. You can also, as an action, discard an asset you control, parlay, to remove a barrier between this location and a connect location. Very, very hard one to do.
Yeah, maybe just spend the clues.
Yep. Next, we got the Fish Street Bridge. 1 shroud, 2 per clues, victory 1. It gets +1 shroud for each barrier between it and a connecting location. So at the start, it's probably going to have 4 shroud, unless you got rid of this barrier, of course. But it could have less, of course. It also has an action to add 2 curse tokens to the chaos bag, parlay to remove a barrier.
Yeah, one of the very few times that curses are actually part of the campaign.
Correct. And it's the reason why, and because it hasn't actually come out yet, I'm pretty sure they have to add the bless and curse tokens into the campaign box for the repackage.
Yep, exactly.
Alrighty. So that's a nice one to do. Next, we got the Shorewood Slums. 2 shroud, 1 per clues. Put a set aside face down key here, and you can take a damage to remove a barrier. This one is very nice. Usually taking the damage isn't that bad, especially if someone has high health. And this one has an extra key.
Yeah, and this one not having an action is also really nice. So the ones that are the ones you're supposed to move through, so the House on Water Street, as you can see, and Shorewood Slums, you don't take an action to remove them, which is cool.
Yeah, once again, it's kind of like it's fairing you in this direction, and it is rewarding you for doing so, because it's easier to get to the barriers when you get to those locations as well.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's go over here to the Innsmouth jail. 3 shroud 1 precludes victory 1. Spend as an action. Spend 3 resources to remove a barrier. And here's one actually. If you control the black key, parlay, read flashback 8. So the black key is unfortunately over here. So a little difficult to get back to it, but not impossible.
Mm-hmm. You might be able to come back here and then go through this area if you get rid of those.
Sure. Do we want to go to flashback 8?
Let's do it. Let's pretend we were to make it over there and come back.
All right. So flashback 8. Something about getting out of jail that I don't remember. I guess I don't know.
It's
We're
the suspect,
talking to
right?
a middle-aged man. Is it? I guess so.
I think so.
Sure. My skimming skills are not very good, and also I don't even remember what this said. Anyway, so we recover a memory of a jailbreak, and we get to remove one of the cultist tablet or elder thing tokens for the remainder of the campaign, which is very, very nice because at this point it's possible that you only have one of each of them in the bag, so you can, in theory, get rid of the worst one that you think.
They'll come back soon, maybe.
They might come back soon. Correct.
Yeah. So, man, this is like a big part of the campaign of deciding which of these to remove if you are able to do this.
Yeah. It's tricky.
What do you
'Cause, I mean,
usually do? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so the real tricky thing about the scenario reference card is that they always do a good job, or at least nowadays, of balancing out the tokens. Like obviously, in the old days, it used to be like, oh, skulls and cultists were like fine, then like tablets were bad, and then elder things were like insanely bad.
Mm-hmm.
But nowadays, the kind of default that they've done is that like skulls are skulls. Cultists have like an okay negative modifier, but like a bad effect if you fail. Tablets are like in the middle, and then elder things are usually just very large negative modifier, but maybe not even consequences for failure, right? And so it's actually a trade-off. Be like, are we gonna get rid of like a -4 or -5 in the bag, or like the risk that we lose a bajillion things of progress, right?
Yeah. So the cultist one in this particular scenario, although not in future ones necessarily, is real rough. As you can see
Yeah.
here, it's just -2, but if you fail, you go backwards, move to the connecting location to the east, which is this way.
Yep. And you also ignore barriers. So if you needed to get back and there were some barriers in the way, you'd have to maybe go all the way around, or remove them yourself.
Yeah, and we'll talk about this again because there's an encounter card that does this effect, but I like to remove that one if I feel like it's likely to happen. Minus
That's
2
fair
isn't
enough.
terrible, but the thing is, sometimes you take tests that you are never able to pass, so encounter cards can screw you up a little bit
Hey,
there.
especially if you're Stella.
Mm-hmm.
Oh
Yep.
gosh.
Yep. It may or may not have happened more than once in my playthrough.
Oh gosh. Oh gosh. Anyway. All right, that is flashback 8. Next, we can go to the Innsmouth Square. We're in for a little bit of a surprise because it's 4 shroud 1 precludes with victory 1. When it's revealed, we spawn the Innsmouth Shoggoth, exhausted, if I recall.
Mm-hmm.
This guy's huge.
Yeah. It is nice that he comes in exhausted, but if you come here as your last action, because it's your first playthrough of it, that you're like, well, all right.
Yep. Speaking of, the Innsmouth Shoggoth, 3 fight, 4 health, 2 evade, monster Shoggoth elite, hunter, and massive. It gets +2 per investigator health, and it moves via its hunter keyword, ignores, when it does so, it ignores all barriers, and when it moves, it removes all the barriers that it moved through. So it ignores barriers. But in theory, it can, I guess, clear them out. I guess, like, depending on which side you are in, maybe this could help, like, someone catch up to you.
Sure. Yeah.
I've never had that happen because I've killed it as fast as I can.
Yeah, this guy is bad news, and it's really not. It doesn't look that bad on the surface of it. I mean, the 2 damage to horror is pretty awful, but there's a lot of enemies in this one. So if you're gonna kill it, you need to do it within basically the round that you spawn it and the one afterwards.
Luckily, it only has 2 evade, which is not terrible.
Mm-hmm. You can get away.
Yeah. Also, back on the Innsmouth Square, it has an action to parlay. This doesn't actually remove a barrier. Rather, it moves a barrier between this location and a connecting one to a different connecting one. So it kind of like puts this that way, for example.
Mm-hmm.
That could be done. And yeah, this has oh, actually that's right. If the investigators control 2 or more keys, you get to read Flashback 5, which I forgot is like an actual thing that does happen as well.
Mm-hmm.
So Flashback 5, we have a deal with Joe Sargent. This is a kind of temporary benefit, but we get a little friend to help us out. Someone at the Innsmouth Square can take control of him, and he is an ally hybrid, 1 health, 2 sanity. He uses 3 tickets. When he leaves play, he removes from the game, and you can spend a ticket to move to a location that is not fully flooded, a connecting location, I should say. So someone gets some extra moves, which is very, very handy.
Yes, very handy, especially when things start to get start to build up a little bit more, and you need to just leave. I found that the movement in this scenario was really important. We've said it all along for Innsmouth, but um, this is the one where having an extra ability to move 3 times, it's not even you don't even exhaust them, so you could just use it all up at once if you need to catch up.
Yep. And definitely for solo players, this is nice since all of the movement is just for you,
Mm-hmm.
and so that can save a lot of rounds.
All right.
Yeah.
Another victory point here. If you are able to sit around here, maybe your fighters are dealing with the Shoggoth, you can sit there as the Kluver and get the clues. So yeah, not bad.
Not bad. Alrighty, moving on to New Church Green. 3 shroud, 1 per clues. Put a face down key. And as an action, if there are no clues, just spend the action to remove a barrier. So again, easy, but it still takes an action. No other costs, though.
So at this point, shall we take a look at the agenda flipping?
Let us do that, yes. So we'd have 6 Doom on our first agenda. And when it flips, we increase the flood level of each coastal location. So the coastal locations are the ones in these 2 columns.
Mm-hmm.
You can see here that if we increase them, it would look like this. Of course, other cards or effects might also increase them, but this will be this is what it would look like if it just was those. And also, we get to shuffle in some additional enemies that were removed during setup, just to increase the pressure a little bit, along with the encounter discard pile.
Mm-hmm. So I love this map where it's the tide's starting to come in from the east to the west, and
Indeed.
subsequent agenda flips will predictably raise the flood level of the other locations.
Yep. Alrighty, let's move on to the Esoteric Order of Dagon, where our black key is. 4 shroud, 1 per clues. We also get another face down key, so that's actually nice. And as a double action, you can parlay and test 3 intellect to remove a barrier. That is very difficult and not worth 2 actions, probably.
It's funny, they needed to give something for all of these, right?
Yeah, but also they had to make this very hard just to be like, oh, you could just get to the railroad station directly from here. So they don't want you to just skip over it.
I mean, if you can parlay, if you can pass an intellect 3 test, you might as well just spend clues to get rid of these.
Exactly.
You know?
Indeed. Alrighty, moving on. We got the First National Grocer. I hate this one.
Yeah.
3 shroud, 2 for clues, victory 1. Forced, after you enter this location from a connecting location, place a barrier between both locations. So if you moved from there to there, then you would get a barrier right there. If you moved from here to there, you get a barrier right there.
Mm-hmm.
And quickly enough, the barriers start to stack a lot, especially if you're in 4 players and every single person needs to somehow get here.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. This one definitely, I don't know. Did you feel this one at all during solo?
I'm trying to remember exactly what happened, but the weird part in solo also is that you do need to pick up the keys.
Yeah.
And if you're using any tech like Look What I Found or discovering clues from connecting locations, you need to be there to get the key. So
Right.
if you feel like you need to leave and then you're like going to pick up the key on your way back, then
Right.
you're starting to add this extra times. I want to say that something like that happened, but I don't remember exactly.
Yeah.
But otherwise, no. I mean, if you're just like bye, then you can just run through.
Yeah, I can tell you from experience, this one is an absolute pain in multiplayer. Because this is like a 1 per player barrier type situation.
Mm-hmm.
So that is very, very annoying. But there's an action to parlay. You can test your lowest skill too, and if you succeed, you remove a barrier. So I guess there's an easy way to do it if someone has extra actions. But it's also awkward since it's like if each investigator is doing it, you have to like stagger the actions and like the spending of clues to make sure that everyone can get there, because you don't have all your turns go at the same time. It's weird.
Yeah. Like I said, I think spending clues, you're not using the clues for anything else in this scenario, right? You're just picking them up to get the keys, which you want to do already, and the victory points, which you want to do already, and you just spend them when it comes time for this stuff to stack up. Now, there's other effects, of course. Like we didn't talk about the tablet here, but that also can add extra barriers.
Yep.
All right.
Alrighty. So we got the Gilman House. 3-shot 2 per clues. We get another face down key. And the action to parlay is combat or agility 2 to remove a barrier. So this one's a little difficult, but not unfeasible.
Bring your fine clothes.
Indeed. Oh, yeah, indeed.
Or your Alessandro Zorzi.
Yeah. All right, moving on. So we have the Sawbone Alley. 4-shot 2 per clues. Victory 1. Action to parlay test willpower 1 per investigator. If you succeed, remove a barrier. And this one checks if all 7 keys are controlled by the investigators, and we read Flashback 7.
Now, we don't actually have all 7 keys on the table yet, so let's go advance the agenda and find the last one.
Indeed. So, let us advance the agenda. We have, first we have to increase the flood level of each Midtown location, which is these 3 columns.
Yep.
You can see that this is both coastal and Midtown, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And then this can just go all the way. And what else happens during our agenda flip? You get an angry mob. It's here. It's back. And we get one of the set-aside keys. That's where the 6th set-aside key is. And funny enough, it goes into Innsmouth Square, along with potentially a Shoggoth.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Timing this one is really interesting because, again, it doesn't happen until the agenda flip. So if you want to get all 7 keys, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, they're all out now. You don't want to be too far away from this location. Maybe you can send someone back, but then it's like, wait a minute. I have to kill something with 4 plus 4 per investigator health.
Yeah. And honestly, so if reminder that the flashback is going to give you a memory recovered. In order to get this flashback, you need all 7 keys. I find that this particular memory, the one that requires all 7 keys, might be the hardest memory in the entire campaign to actually get. It's really, really hard. And spoiler, getting all of the memories is a prerequisite to get the quote-unquote secret hidden ending. It is very difficult to do so, I think, in part because of this one memory to get.
Yeah, I've done it once. 4-player.
Nice.
And really, it was just kind of you let the angry mob catch up to you because you've added some extra barriers around. So it just moves right towards wherever your location is, probably in the last column. And then you just go to work.
Yeah, it does feel awkward that we're like, the way that I can get this angry mob to move to me faster is by creating no path between it and us.
Yep.
And so it just forces it to go straight to the barriers, which is interesting.
I would say most players, especially I only did it on 4-player. I think on 2, this is like ridiculously hard because this is what, 12 health?
12 health.
And you don't have time for that, really.
Nope, you do not.
Well, if we were to do it, what do we get out of that?
Yeah, Flashback 7. So we record an intervention. We get a +1 token into the bag. Wonderful. And other than that, who are we talking to? Let's see. You take your hand.
An old lady who's a hybrid, I assume.
I guess so.
Yeah.
And something about Mother Hydra.
Yep.
I don't think I've actually ever read this. That's why I don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, but the +1, it's a nice little bonus, but I guess you never ever use the second +1 unless you're playing on easy, maybe sometimes. I don't know.
I guess so. I mean, on standard has its +1. It's another token that isn't an auto.
That's true. And if you're a rogue, you're happy to see it.
Correct.
Otherwise, probably not worth your time.
Yeah. However, we go to the little bookshop, 3-shot 1 per clues. you can take a double action to draw the top card of the encounter deck to remove a barrier. That's probably not a good idea.
Don't
That's
do
like,
that.
hey, I would love to take 2 actions to draw an enemy that will kill me. I'd love that. However, here's the real thing. Free trigger if the investigators here control. Sorry, I should reiterate because this one also doesn't say it. It actually doesn't say if the investigators at this location control 5 or 7 keys. It's just if the investigators control 5 or 7.
Mhm.
So not everyone needs to be here, which is like the real awesome thing about this.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
this one gives
Anyway.
you something really good and important, I think.
Correct. Yeah. So this is 5 or more in Flashback 6. We get to record a followed lead as a memory recovered, and we get the teachings of the Order, or at least someone does. This is a really neat thing. So this is a story asset that someone will get. It's permanent, and it has 3 free triggered abilities on it that each time, obviously, you have to exhaust it. But each time you can only do once this campaign. So the first one allows you to remove all curse tokens from the cast bag. Okay. You can remove a float token from a non-sanctum location. That's interesting. I don't think we've ever seen a sanctum location before yet.
Mm-hmm.
And there is one to defeat a non-elite enemy at your location. That also seems really cool. So this one is obviously very, very useful, and definitely you should pick it up because each one of these effects is like distinctly useful in one particular scenario, which is very interesting.
Yeah. And it's also there's a lot of flooding effects in this campaign that tell you take 5 direct damage or something awful, and this is a way to get rid of that effect. Essentially, if you're stuck in a corner and you need to go to an unflooded location, well, just do this. But yes, there is a scenario towards the end of the campaign where this is much, much more useful.
Indeed.
All right.
Alrighty.
It's also a tome, so if you're Daisy Walker, you get to draw an extra card on your elder side.
True. Or if you're Parallel Daisy, you get an extra willpower, I guess.
Yeah.
Right?
Or if you're playing with Witten Green, whoever you are.
Oh yeah. You have permanent
Always
win
on.
green.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. Very nice. All right. Last location we got. We can remove this little barrier here. We got the railroad station, obviously. 1 shroud, 0 clues. It has a forced effect. You take a damage if you fail a difficulty 2 agility test when you enter. And otherwise, it has an action to resign. Shall we do the last agenda as well?
Yeah.
Oh, actually, this is something that I forgot to talk about. So in each agenda, it tells you what happens when you end your turn at a fully flooded location, and it actually gets worse the more the scenario goes on.
That's right.
So at the beginning, if you end your turn there, you take a damage. Second agenda, you take a damage and a horror. Third agenda, you take a damage, a horror, and discard a card at random from your hand. Jesus. And then once this happens, we increase the flood level of every location. Everyone draws basically an extra encounter card. And then we have this last agenda, which is just if you end your turn fully flooded, you take a damage, you take a horror, you discard 2 cards, and then obviously when this one advances, I think we die. Yeah, Innsmouth was consumed by the rising tide. So hopefully don't do that.
Yeah, in my experience with this one, maybe it also depends on player count, but usually it doesn't get that far, or at least, okay. I mean, this is maybe a good time to talk about what tends to happen in this.
Yeah.
By player count, it's not too hard to run through, as I said before, and get to the end.
Mm-hmm.
What can be challenging is someone might get stuck behind, and the more people you have, the more likely someone just has to eat it.
Yeah, yeah, basically.
Because not only do we see this whole flooding thing, but we're going to have an increasing amount of enemies just showing up, and it may not be worth your time to kill them. Running away is totally fine. There aren't there are a bunch of hunter enemies, really, but not all of them spawn ready and will run after you right away. So your choice is sometimes, do you stay and fight, or do you keep going to stay ahead of the tide? I like to run ahead.
Yeah, and it's also tricky because if you are trying to get all 7 keys, it's like hard to run ahead, and then you'd be like, oh, I have to go back to get the angry mob key, or like we're like stuck in this area right here between the between the grocery and as the order of Dagon, you're like trying to go back and forth, trying to get this key and not die, and it's weird.
So the best thing if you're trying to have a nice run is this is one of the possible places that the black key can be.
Yeah, it's honestly so crazy how this is like this can happen, and if it does, it like completely changes your run because makes it so easy.
It could be on an earlier location too. And
Correct. It
that's
could be
perfectly
Shorewood
fine.
Slums or the House on Water Street, and in both of those cases, it's actually like really really easy.
So that's a
Um,
50% chance, right?
yeah, sure. It can also just be like I don't know. I mean, I think honestly, this might be the worst one. Now that I think about it,
Yeah.
it's like the farthest away and with like the most barriers in between.
So the other possibilities are this one and this one, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That's those three. Yeah, Sawbone Alley's not so terrible because you could manage to sneak back and then
Yeah.
go forward again. But yeah. um, I don't know. So like that makes it a little more interesting to see which location it ends up spawning at. But
Yeah.
really, the enemies are the showstopper here. So let's take a look at the encounter deck then.
Let's do it. All right. So first we got the Ravagers from the Deep, which aren't actually in the encounter deck to start. They get shuffled in on the second agenda, but here we are. So two fight, 4 health, 1 evade, humanoid monster, deep 1. It has Hunter, and while its location is flooded, it gets +1/+1. It gets +2/+2 if it's fully flooded. Fight and evade. And as all the deep ones do, it has an effect when it engages you. When it does, you have to test 2 combat. And if you fail, you place a barrier between your location and the connecting location to the west. So, in theory, it's trying to stop your progress.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, I guess technically, like you have like a 1 in 3 chance for it to matter. Because usually, when you're snaking around, like if you put an extra barrier like in the middle here or like on one of the 3 ones, it like literally doesn't matter.
Right.
But
Or
there
if-
is a chance.
Or if you're over here, it doesn't matter either.
Correct. All right. Well, these guys are okay. I mean, obviously, 4 health is a lot, but 2 combat and 1 agility is pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
Albeit they
agree.
can get boosted.
And the
a little
2
bit.
damage and 1 horror is kind of rough too. If it ends up attacking you, I like to just run away from these guys. 4 health is maybe a lot to chew through if you're already have other enemies on the board, but depends on what your
Yeah.
setup is at this point.
True.
Remind me, could you spend experience between the last 2 scenarios? This one,
Yeah.
yeah, okay,
Yes.
yeah. But it may not be very much. You're going on the first 2 scenarios. The second one tends not to have too much XP.
Yep.
Depending on how things go, but yeah, I think this is a tough third scenario.
Pretty tough. All right. Next, we got the emerging deep 1, 3/2/1 humanoid monster deep 1 hunter, and it enters play exhausted and unengaged unless its location is fully flooded. And after it engages you, if your location is flooded, aka partially or fully flooded, it attacks you. So there is actually a good side to this. It might just come into play exhausted and unengaged, which is very nice. Usually that happens in the early game when you're either ahead of the tide or at a location that isn't fully flooded at all. Yeah, honestly, this guy's pretty nice.
Mm-hmm. You want him to you would like to draw him at the beginning. I love the art here. Like, what's he just like wandering into a school cafeteria or something? Like
Yeah.
that door is kind of funny. I don't know. I don't ever try to kill this guy at the beginning. I just run away. I feel like I can keep ahead. But 2 help if you have to is probably fine.
Yeah, and honestly, like if you have a fighter that's like dedicated fighter and they have like an extra machete swing, it's like whatever, just might as well kill it.
True.
Or I guess not machete.
Not machete. Switchblade.
Yeah, sure. There you
Yeah. All right.
go. All right. Oh god, this card. So we got the deep 1 invasion. So you shuffle the encounter discard pile into the encounter deck, and for each location to the east of your location on the same row, discard cards from the top of the encounter deck until a deep 1 enemy with the hunter keyword is discarded, and spawn that enemy at that location. So I feel like some people have some confusion on how this actually works. So let's do an example.
Sure.
So let's say that you draw it while you're here. So first you would shuffle everything in, then for each location to the east. So that's this one and this one. So So let's just say we start with this one. We discard until we gotta draw a hunter enemy or a deep one enemy and spawn it here. Then we do the same for this one. So ultimately, we're gonna draw 2 enemies, unless there are like not 2 enemies in the deck, because then it'll just fizzle.
Right.
But that's how that works. So first of all, if you draw it here, literally nothing happens. I believe you just shuffle the encounter discard pile into the deck.
Yes,
nice.
you are very lucky if that happens. But it, this encounter deck is bad enough where that's fine. But yeah, if you can avoid it, I think even shuffling it into a discard pile into the encounter deck is tough in this one, just because sometimes you dispatch some of the troublesome enemies and then you don't want to draw them again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to give an example, if you draw it here, you are spawning 4 enemies. And I'm pretty sure all of the deep ones also have hunter anyway. So
no, these 2 guys do not.
Yes, although this one kind of has hunter.
Yeah, but there's 3 of the lurking deep ones, so those guys never spawn with this.
That's true.
Yeah, and this guy, I always forget, is not a deep one.
Not a deep one, but it has hunter, so it does count. No, it does not.
Does not count. Yeah,
it has to be deep one and hunter. Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
All right.
Which at the beginning that card is actually just the emerging deep ones.
Correct.
Yeah, it's a tough card, but it also makes you, if you've played it before, you'll know not to just leave your investigator straddling all of the different columns, because it gets really bad.
Yep. Alrighty, we got pulled back. Test 3 willpower. If you fail, move to the east, ignore all barriers, and then place each key you control in your location. Womp womp. I mean, I'm pretty sure this card has killed runs pretty often. Is this a spoiler for your solo run?
You'll have to watch to see what happened, but
yeah.
This is just one of those where if you can't pass 3 willpower, then you lose a lot.
Yeah, especially God. It really sucks that it's like it ignores the barriers, because you're like, well, that ruined like 2 to 3 rounds.
So let's think about how bad, and this is the cultist token as well.
Correct.
How bad this can really be. So if you're at the beginning, it's not that bad, because you can move quickly through the Innsmouth Harbor and this one. So it's not that big of a deal to make this circuit again.
Yep.
But if you're past about here, it starts to be bad, not just because of the barriers, but because of all the enemies that you left behind, or the ones that got spawned behind you because of the card we just looked at.
Yep.
So,
I'm pretty sure this is how it works. But there was one time that I drew a cultist and failed that test.
Yeah.
So I believe you would move twice.
You do. You get to choose the order. Not that it matters, but I guess it's where the keys get dropped, maybe. Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah. Have you ever drawn it on the last location?
No, but that does seem like a nightmare. Oh God. Yeah, imagine you're taking that agility test and then you draw the cultist and it gives you back here. That's crazy.
And you take a damage.
Oh God.
To add a little teeny tiny insult to injury.
Yep.
All right.
Last new card last scenario specific card. We have Inundated. You place a barrier between this location and each connecting location with no barriers between them. And if no barriers are placed, it just gains Surge. So this can really hamper things down. Obviously, like if you're in the, First National Grocery, you'll like add a barrier here and there, for example.
Mm-hmm.
That it can be a lot of barriers. Obviously, if you're all grouped up together, it might be okay, because then you can kind of just power through it. But if you're a little bit separated, it might get annoying.
Yeah, I try to not spend my clues or do whatever to remove barriers until after the Mythos phase.
Yeah.
That said, the Elder thing does kind of combo with this if you leave extra barriers around.
Yep.
Yeah, and that the tablet sort of does this effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
And then we got 2 new cards in a new encounter set. We have Tidal Alignment, Peril, Revelation. Choose a location where there is at least 1 investigator. Increase that investigator's flood level. Each investigator at the chosen location takes damage. If the chosen location's flood level is not increased by this effect, it gains Surge. So this one always feels familiar to me. One of those cards in the Forgotten Age.
Ill Omen.
Ill Omen, that's right. That's put a doom on someone's location, and everyone there takes a horror.
Yep.
This one is very interesting because there's a interesting like rules interaction that needs to be taken into account, which is you can technically choose a location that is fully flooded, and everyone there will still take a damage, but this will still gain surge because the flood level didn't change, which is very interesting. So if you can avoid that, that would be good.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Unless you have to.
Unless you have to at the end where potentially people are still stuck in flooded locations, fully flooded
Yep.
locations, which is already bad.
Correct. And it doesn't say that you have to choose an unflooded one if you can. So like technically you could choose to do someone like who has high health that's fully flooded just to be like they'll take a damage and we'll just have to get a new card.
Yep.
Other than try and kill someone else, for example.
Yeah, you have to be pretty desperate for that to be the
For
right
sure.
play, I think.
But that's the tricky part because it is peril, so you kind of have to think about that by yourself.
True, that's right.
So that is interesting. Anyway, the next one we have is Syzygy, which is I love to say the word. Great word.
It's good.
Syzygy. It is also peril, and you must decide. Everyone loses 3 resources, everyone takes 2 horror, or you put a doom on the current agenda, and it can cause it to advance. So this is like low on supplies, jacked to 11.
I know.
And every time we drew this in my blind playthrough, I wanted to scream because I hated this card so much. Not even because it was necessarily really bad, but I think all of us were running like, I don't know, maybe resource heavy decks. And usually losing 3 resources is like the correct option, but it just meant that no one could play any cards ever.
So low on supplies, correct me if I'm wrong, is the same thing, but take a damage, lose 2 resources, or lose an asset.
Correct.
This one is just so much worse.
Yeah.
Reminder, of course, is that as long as only one person has a resource and everyone else has nothing, then you still can choose the first one. That's fine.
It changes the game state with something. Yeah, and this was always weird because okay, I should say this. This one was definitely a target for like because you know the meme of like, oh, always ward protection ancient evils. That like usually is a thing, but some people have started to argue that it's no longer a thing anymore. This one is definitely a thing if you draw it. Obviously you have to draw it to ward it because it's peril. But this was a huge target for us. Like I think I was playing Diana, and every time I drew this card I warded it.
Gosh,
because I don't know, it's so bad. But what are your thoughts?
I think it's awful. I usually do the horror one at the beginning of the game and then later the resources.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
I feel like we're going to see the other ways in which you take horror in this particular scenario, or at least care about your sanity, but losing 3 resources is a huge chunk.
It's huge.
Yeah. That's the difference between you getting out a weapon or not.
Yeah.
So peril makes it pretty tough because you don't know what people are trying to do with their hand that turn. So
Yep. Yeah. And that's why we were like, oh, it's probably the 3 resources. And everyone's like, no. Like, I don't want to kill you. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Everything else is returning, but I think these ones in particular have like a special place in this scenario just because there's going to be a lot of deep ones out, and therefore the Bill here is going to be moving a lot, in my opinion, or at least he usually does.
Yeah, he does. Yep. And this guy, the lurking deep one, is a reprieve to some extent.
Yeah.
Because you can just kill him and move.
Yeah.
That's fine. I think there's 3 of them, and that's okay. But when they start to move,
oh god,
because someone else just drew that, and then they all disengage and then engage you.
And right, if you're like, oh, we can plan the hunting deep ones to like go around the barriers, and then you draw this, and they just go straight to you through the barriers. They're like, stop.
Yep. This is such a tough card in this one because you usually you're planning to, I don't know, end your turn in a location where they're 2-way so they don't catch up to you, any of the hunters, and then this just says you're screwed. All right.
Indeed.
The flooding ones I don't think we need to talk about too much.
No.
But I alluded to this last time. We have both Dreams of Aurelia and Innsmouth Look in the same scenario.
Is this the only one that has both?
Yep.
Yeah. And so this is a problem. You can die out of nowhere from sanity sanity death, and it's bad.
Yeah,
Um,
this is a mistake. They should not have them both. I
they're
get
like, we need all the deep ones though.
they could also just not have this in the scenario.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, if you draw, there's 4 of them, right? There's 4 copies of
total.
this stuff.
Yep.
If you draw 2 of them yourself, that's tough. Now if you draw 3 of them, you're probably dead.
You're probably dead.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
This investigators cannot parlay is relevant for removing barriers, but I always forget that the act is not a parlay.
Correct. Yeah,
In
the
the
act is not.
in the previous scenario it was.
Yes.
This time it's not.
No, but everything else that removes barriers on the locations, I believe, is a parlay, which is interesting.
Yeah. Or the getting the keys, right? Or the flashbacks rather.
Yes, the flashbacks are also parlays.
How annoying would it be to draw this on the turn that you know you're getting to the locations with the parlays? You're like,
Yep. Yeah.
hello. Ugh. Cute, but all right. Young deep ones I think they don't come in until later. So
No, but they do have Hunter, so they can be spawned by that card.
that's true. Yeah.
And again, taking a horror is bad in this one because of the -1 sanity cards.
Yep. Yeah, there's not a lot of reprieve except for probably these guys.
Yeah, and mostly it's just because if you go fast enough, you can probably just get to locations that are just unflooded the entire time.
Yeah, and you don't plan on going back really, so it
No.
doesn't really matter if you're saying, oh, the one behind me is going to be more flooded now. Who cares? Oh, one more thing. The Innsmouth
Right.
Troublemaker spawns at the location with the most clues.
Yep.
Well, if you are paying attention, we said you don't actually need the clues for anything but the places with keys and the victory
Right.
points. Most of them are victory points or keys. These 2 locations are not.
Yes.
So, one thing you can do is just leave all the clues on these first couple locations.
Yep.
Make sure the troublemakers spawn back here, and then hopefully you just keep ahead of them.
Obviously, it's a little tricky if you get to a location that has 2 per. Make sure to clear it out as fast as you can, if you can.
Mm-hmm.
But there it is.
Yeah, I think those guys are pretty tough otherwise because it's what 4 health or no 3 health and 4 fight.
Yep.
You don't want them to hunt into you because they do 2 damage at once, and that's not fun.
No.
All right. This is a cool scenario. I think this one's just a lot of fun to play because there's so much going on. You got to pay attention to this map. I just want to leave it on the screen a little bit longer so you see like it's just a great concept of a map that has what 15 locations, and it's as simple as what it says on the act, like run, get to the railroad station.
And yeah, the map is really well designed. I really like the placement of the barriers. Like it's very intelligently designed to give you push and pulls in multiple directions to like, oh, you can get there faster if you get through more barriers, but there's more to explore. There's the keys, more victory points as well if you want to take the entire snaking path. So yeah, it's very, very well designed.
So what's your success rate on this one? Do you feel like it's usually you can get as much as all the BP, the flashbacks? Is it hard to do that with a large group?
Yeah, so I think I usually get the 5 keys at least. And what I sometimes do is I literally just try to avoid the grocer and the esoteric order of Dagon. Because if you're only getting 5, you don't need to get this one and this one. And
That's
so
true,
you can
yeah.
kind of just like go up here, get this one, come back, and then use this parlay to move the barriers out of the way. And like maybe you get through here, or in fact, you can even go through here. Because I just hate the groceries so much. I
It's
need
awful.
to avoid it.
Yeah, if you can get around it, yeah, that's much better.
Yeah. But yeah, obviously you want to get here. Like this is the key place. Like the main reward of this scenario is getting the book. So
The key place indeed.
Yep.
So there is a recording on my channel of this one. I actually recorded it beforehand, a different run of it because I sometimes I re-record if I make a huge mistake. And it wasn't in that scenario. It was in the previous one. I just had recorded both scenarios, and then I went back and saw how I played the second scenario, Vanishing of Eleanor Harper, and I massively cheated. I forgot to spend resources for like an entire turn. I'm like,
Oh,
okay, whatever. I'll just replay this. No big deal.
okay.
And when I played this, the version that will never appear on YouTube, I had this incredible run that in solo I didn't know was even possible. I finished the whole thing, I think, including whatever setup and introduction. The video was 28 minutes long. That was it, going from beginning to the end. And you might say,
Draw.
yeah, you might say, like, what happened? I die? Like, no, it was track shoes. You just run
Oh,
through
okay.
every location.
Track sheet. Yeah.
Uh, it went very, very well, and I don't know, like it was just a strange. It solo is very swingy. I think just
Yeah.
it could be easy, it could be very hard. But I was like, am I doing something wrong? And no, I didn't do anything wrong in that scenario. It was the previous one that I messed up on. But I didn't kill the big Chugga or anything. But I
Yeah.
think I got almost all the VP, and I certainly got all the keys other than the angry mob.
Yeah.
But well, you can see what happened in the one that I actually played that is of record. um, but if you have something like Pathfinder, Track Shoes, Shortcut,
Being Luke Robinson.
oh well, you know that is yeah, that is a problem for this scenario.
Hot tech. Janae Beauregard is also insane, as always. But in this one, because you can move the enemies through the barriers, and they might have to go all the way around them.
Ooh, that's
pretty
really
sick.
funny.
And you can also like pull clues between locations that have barriers. That's or move clues off of locations that don't have victory, that have the keys on. I mean, obviously it's good, but it's always she's always really good.
So with this one, I really do feel like a big strategy is to make sure that the hunters have that clear path. It's not always possible, but if you do have an excess amount of clues, you can do it, and that way they don't just immediately go engage you. They have to go around the snaking path instead, the same way that you can, which is much more fair.
And sometimes you can actually finagle it in a very interesting way, where like if like you can actually time it where they might start going down a path and like you're up here and you can kind of force them. Let's say that okay, actually this is a good example. So let's say you're here, and let's say that there's an enemy here, right? If a barrier gets put down here, a no path will be like a null path will be created. You can force them to just go up because they will ignore paths, and that is still in the direction of minimum path.
That's
then
true.
You could remove the barrier and then force them to go back down again.
Okay, that's true. Yeah. If you're still there.
There's some hot tech.
That's funny. All right. Well, we're going to go and talk about our scenario. Oh, no. Let's do the resolutions.
Oh, this one is fairly short because regardless of whether or not you died or not, you're going to get to the vehicles, and you always get 2 bonus experience. Although I think, let's see, what's on the back of this agenda? It doesn't. Yeah, it's just you resign. So you get to R1, but you're safe. And the only real downside is if Innsmouth was consumed by the rising tide, which I think matters later.
I think you don't make it safely to your vehicles, right?
If
everyone dies?
Well, each defeated. No, because it still goes to R1, right?
Yeah, but it's only if you.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. When you resign, that's on the back of the act. It says that. That's right.
Yeah.
So that's just getting the extra 2 experience. So
only,
regardless,
only one person needs to resign for that to happen.
Correct. Yeah, because then it'll flip the axe.
Yes. As long as everyone else dies and doesn't doom out, then you're good.
Yes. Although I think this one, because everyone who hasn't resigned is defeated, and therefore everyone who has resigned is resigned. Right.
That's right.
Yeah. Anyway, there we go. We're moving on to Devil Reef. At this point, like in the present day, now we're in the cars. We're trying to get to a lighthouse. But we're gonna have another flashback.
Yay, flashback! Don't spend any XP.
Yes, and this one specifically, you will not be able to spend XP between this scenario and the next. So buckle up.
All right. So, as usual, we'll talk about some of our thoughts regarding replayability, balance, fairness, and the experience. So, this one I think is also interesting to talk about because there's no random elements here other than the encounter deck and where that black key gets put. So in principle, it's kind of the same thing, but it might play out very differently depending on which enemies get drawn when, and if something bad happens, like a cultist token that makes you go behind.
Yeah, this one definitely is not like swingy per se, but the each like random element, namely the encounter deck and enemies drawn, can have a big impact on the course of the scenario. Because you're not just going from one location to the next. Like you might get pulled back, as you said. You might have an enemy spawn in an unfortunate location. The timing of when the agendas advance might cause you to be in flooded locations, therefore deal with more enemies, etc. Um, so like there is some inherent replayability with that. And there's also there's like kind of two different routes to take. You have a lot of choice when it comes to what path you want to take and how you want to deal with the barriers. You can go the full snake route, or you can try and shortcut that a little bit, which is definitely a viable option.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is that level of replayability in just like allowing you to make those choices.
Plus the degrees of completion with the number of keys you get, although it's just 5 or 7, really.
Yeah, that is true. Okay, so for replayability, I think I'm gonna give it a 4, which honestly is a little high now thinking about it, but I do think that because of the barriers, there's like very small things that can change the scenario that are both random but also controlled by your choices. And I think that leads to a lot of different outcomes.
Yeah, that's higher than I was going to go. I was going to go 3.5, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a little bit above average, but once you kind of figure out what the strategy is supposed to be, that is the strategy you probably will use, and that's okay. I like the scenario. This is actually just not a strong point of it, I think. So we'll move on to fairness. Are there some decisions to make? Can
Yeah,
you mitigate random elements? And I think, yeah, the answer is yes.
the answer is yes, albeit there is one random element that you can't really mitigate, and it is the black key.
Right.
Um, I think the placement of the black key is very impactful in both potentially a good way and or a bad way. Um, and that's a little unfair, I would think. Like if the black key is on the instant jail versus the esoteric order of Dagon, that
Yeah.
can wildly change whether or not you get the right flashbacks.
So I
Um,
like to just guess Innsmouth Jail on the previous scenario just because it's the best thing that could happen, right? If you're
yeah,
if you're left with it as an option at the end, you're like, well, I might as well root for the thing that makes my life easier next scenario.
I guess so. Or you root for the one that doesn't, so that you have an easier time if it is easier. Wait, you know what? I don't know. Um, anyway, so yeah. That being said, I think the barriers are the one thing that's like you have so many options that you can make that are meaningful to whether or not like your game plan, I should say, succeeds or not. There's a lot of strategy that you can have with this particular scenario.
Right.
And I always think that the um, the amount of pressure is always feels right. Like I never like there are a lot of enemies, but usually the amount of pressure that's put on you is like directly because you're trying to go for everything, like all the VP and all the keys, and therefore you are like rightly punished, I guess, to trying to get everything right. Um, and so actually, I think it's very appropriate the amount of pressure it puts, and also like the timing. I should say the doom clock is always it always seems fair to me.
It does. There's only the one card that could add Doom. If you want to avoid it, avoid it.
Yep.
And the rest of it is like the flooding and whatnot is kind of you see it coming, right?
Yep. All
So
right.
I think this is quite good. I'm going to put it at a 4.5. It's just the black key issue. I feel like they should have come up with another way to deal with that problem because it doesn't feel very fair because you have nothing. There's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah. I think I'll go a little lower. I'll say a 4. And yeah, it's the black key.
Mhm. Yeah, I just feel like other than that, there's so many different ways you can deal with the map and the enemies that it's fun to figure out those puzzles. Okay,
Indeed.
balance. Do you need anything in particular? We've talked about this before. Probably the campaigns are much better at this.
Definitely. I do think that this one, like, well, I would say that, like, oh, if you have a lot more dedicated fighters slash like flex cloovers that can deal with enemies, this one goes by a lot easier. Just mostly just because it's possible for like a dedicated clover, I should say, to like not be able to handle how much pressure the scenario is giving them,
Mm-hmm.
especially if they're like surrounded and like gets pulled back and they're like just screwed at that point. Um, but other than that, I think it's mostly there. Like all the skills are represented. Obviously movement is like very important here, but it's generally important for every scenario. And the scenario also does give a good job of like filling the gaps for people who might not be as good. Like giving one person extra movement is good. Having the Innsmouth Shoggoth appear exhausted is also like a reasonable way for the scenario to be like, everyone that can contribute to killing this thing can get here in time, in
Mm-hmm.
theory, right? So yeah, I mean, I'm gonna give it a 4.5. I think it's really good.
Yeah, me too. I think also at this point you've learned the general conceit of the campaign. The Innsmouth locations flood, you want to stay away from them. The deep ones have on engage effects, you want to stay away from
Yep.
those or at
Oh
least
wait, hold on. I'm gonna correct Mike's score from a 4.5 to a 4
okay.
for multiple minus negative sanity cards in the encounter deck.
Yes, okay. So I'm about to say something about that too. So
Yeah, yeah.
um yeah, so there's two things that I think are kind of unusual from the campaign, which is that I think evasion's kind of good here.
Hmm.
Whereas in the other, I mean, Big Map in Pit of Despair as well, but I think that one encourages you to kill things so they don't catch up with you. This one, I do think it takes a lot of time unless you've got a really nice loadout in the scenario to deal with the enemies, like just by wiping them all out. The scenario doesn't want you to do it, right? That crazy card that could spawn 3 or 4 enemies,
Yeah.
it kind of tells you that already. But yeah, 4 is fine. And then you're right. There's the problem of if you have low sanity already, like you're rolling banks with 1 mental trauma already, ouch.
Which indeed.
All right. Last bit to cap things off is our general experience. New and interesting gameplay loop. Does it establish the fiction it's trying to evoke? Uh, right away, I can say, do you feel like you're running away from an invasion of deep ones through a flooding city? Absolutely.
I definitely feel that way as well. Yeah, and I really enjoy like the barriers as a concept is really really cool. The fact that the flooding takes place from coastal to uptown kind of thing is really really cool as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, every technically the only thing I would say that is missing in terms of flavor is that like the locations, like it doesn't necessarily make sense why each parlay gets rid of barriers the way that it does, right? Um, like I think for the most part you have to really stretch to be like, oh yeah, when you're at the Fifth Street Bridge, you add curses to get rid of stuff. I
Even
guess that
just
makes
that they're
sense.
parlays, like, are you talking to the people there and they're helping
Yeah,
you move them away or something?
yeah, or it's like no, they add the parlay keyword to just avoid attacks opportunity slash make that one card annoying.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, that's like the only miss I would say. But other than that, like the flavor of like Joe Sargent, this like hybrid bus driver coming in trying to save you, is also really cool. Um, yeah, so I think I'll give it a 4.5.
Yeah, I got 2 things to add as nitpicks. I love this scenario. I think it's a lot of fun for the experience for sure. But it kind of bugs me that the locations aren't quite arranged that in the same way they were in the previous scenario.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I love the
Well, because
grid.
previously it was like a weird like diamond shape, and they kind of like flattened it into a rectangle. So
Yeah, but even when you put everything out, it was just in three rows, I think. Wait, is it the
yeah,
same?
correct. Like it was in 3 rows and five
What?
columns, I
Yeah,
believe.
yeah, but it's not the same, right? Because,
No,
or
well, because
maybe
this one has two extra locations.
that's right.
Yeah.
It was actually pretty close. I think the little bookshop was here. Sawbone Alley was there. Yeah, the railroad station wasn't there. There was something else. Um, but yeah, it's like kind of close, but not perfect. Anyway, the other part I was going to nitpick was just like the I don't like the flashbacks. I like the flashbacks in the scenario. I don't like the flashbacks in between scenarios, and I feel like I'm sort of straining to know what the beginning of this scenario is.
Right. Yeah. I literally, because the story is you walked out of the hole that you just crawled out of in the first scenario,
Mhm.
and you're like on the beach or something, and you like literally go into Innsmouth, and you're like, I guess we got to get out of here.
I guess
Right.
we keep running.
Yeah.
But after that Vanishing of the Harper scenario, which I thought had a pretty strong story, this feels like I don't know what's going on. We're just running.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. It also is funny when I look back on it that this scenario was its own Mythos pack originally, because it feels like it's very much tied to the last scenario. But I guess it kind of isn't since these locations are all changed too.
Yeah.
Seems like something where they would have said, hey, we get to reuse the locations in a different scenario. Nope. We'll print 15 new cards.
They're like, oh, we can't fit all this text about getting rid of
No.
barriers.
All right. I guess that is about it for us for now. Thank you all for watching and sticking with us for all this nonsense. It is a deep dive, but I enjoy this. I know that a lot of you out there enjoy it too. And we'll see you next week for Devil Reef, which is scenario number 4. But do not spend your experience in between this week and next week.
Bye.